You're listening to Psych to Parent, where we turn brain science into tiny wins at home. I'm Dr. Amy, your not-so-typical school psychologist, mom of two, and endurance athlete. I love a good data set and a diagnostic manual. But I also forget permission slips, overthink IEP emails, and occasionally replay the moment I snapped at my kids in the car. In other words, I'm in the messy middle with you, not above it. This show is for parents of big feeling, big thinking kids who are tired of vague advice and Pinterest perfect behavior charts. Each episode, I'll pull back the curtain on what I see in real evaluations, school meetings, my private practice, and my own kitchen, and translate the research into simple scripts, tiny routines, and nervous system friendly tweaks you can actually use. Think of it as a nervous system rehab meets mindset coaching meets a smart, slightly spicy, non-judgy friend in your earbuds. We'll take one real life challenge at a time and shrink it down into 1 or 2 tiny wins you can start this week. No perfection, no 47-step sticker systems, just small, repeatable shifts that add up over time. Quick legal-ish note in plain English. This podcast is for education and support. It's not therapy, it does not create a clinical relationship, and it's not a substitute for personalized medical or mental health advice. If you're worried about your child's safety or mental health, or your own, please reach out to a trusted professional. Okay, deep breath, drop your shoulders. You're not behind and you're not alone. Let's get psyched to parent. I get these emails in my private practice all the time. They usually start something like, "Hi, Dr. Amy. I heard about you from a friend, and I'm not even sure where to start. I'm sorry this is such a long email. I just don't know where to go or what to do." And then what follows is usually not one simple concern. It's not usually, "My child struggles with math, full stop." It's more like, "My child seems really anxious at the end of the school year, and now the report card says they're struggling in reading and math." Or, "My kid gets so worried before tests that they shut down, rush, complain of headaches and stomach aches, and then everyone else says they just need to try harder." Or, "My kid is really bright, maybe gifted, but they can't manage the classroom expectations. They struggle with transitions, self-control, task completion, and getting work done." Or, "My child has a 504 plan, but the accommodations are not really happening in a way that helps day to day." And then there's usually that sentence. Or, "My child is capable of advanced work, but their grades are slipping. And every time something gets hard, they seem to take the path of least resistance." And then there's usually that sentence, "Sorry, this is so long." And every time I read that sentence, I hear what's underneath it. It's not, "I love writing long emails." It's, "I'm scared I won't be believed." It's, "I'm trying to make the invisible visible." It's, "I know something is off, but I don't know whether this is anxiety, ADHD, a learning concern, motivation, behavior, school stress, or something else entirely." So in this episode, that's where we're going. We're talking about what to do when school says, "We don't see that here." Because you don't need to prove your worry with every detail from the last 6 months. You need to make the pattern easier to see. And that's the core line today. Bring the pattern, not the novel. Welcome back to Psych to Parent, the school psychologist in the pickup line podcast for parents raising big feeling, big-hearted, big-brain kiddos. I'm Dr. Amy, school psychologist and parent coach, and in this episode, we're talking about what to do when you know something is off, but you don't know how to explain it clearly. Maybe your kid seems fine at school but melts down at home. Maybe homework is turning into a nightly battle. Maybe your kid gets headaches or stomach aches before tests. Maybe they are bright and capable, but they are failing to turn things in, avoiding hard work, or shutting down when the demands go up. Maybe supports exist on paper, but real life still feels like a mess. By the end of this episode, you'll know how to notice the pattern, how to think about anxiety, ADHD, learning differences, stress, and support mismatch without rushing to label your kid, and how to send a clearer 3-bullet email when you need to loop in the teacher or the school team. And friends, because we're not doing panic spirals as a productivity strategy, I'll give you a few tiny wins you can try this week. Today's big takeaway is this: you don't need to prove your worry. You need to make the pattern easier to see. Before we talk about what to write in the email, we have to talk about why that email gets so long in the first place. When you're worried about your kid, it's very hard to be concise. Very hard. I've been there, friends, where my brain spirals about my own kids. And I'm a former special education teacher, kindergarten teacher, learning specialist, and school psychologist. And it's hard for me too. Here's why. Your brain is not just writing an email. Your brain is trying to protect your kid. Your brain is thinking, what if I leave something out that's important? What if the teacher says they don't see it? What if the pediatrician says it's normal? What if it is anxiety or ADHD or dyslexia? What if it's just motivation? What if I'm overreacting as a parent? What if I'm underreacting as a parent? What if school thinks I'm blaming them? What if they think I'm, quote, that parent? And that is how a quick check-in email becomes a full documentary with footnotes. You start with something like, hey, I just wanted to ask about something we're noticing at home. And then suddenly you have a paragraph about homework, a paragraph about stomach aches, and a paragraph about the report card from last year, and a paragraph about that 504 plan, and at least one sentence that says, I'm sorry, this is so long. Friends, I want you to hear me say this very clearly. That does not mean you're dramatic. It does not mean you are too much, and that does not mean you are the problem. A lot of times, the novel is what parents write when they are afraid the pattern will not be believed. So in this episode, I'm not going to tell you care less. Absolutely not. I'm going to help you package the care in a way that other people can actually see and use, because the goal is clarity, not a courtroom. So let's zoom out for a second, not into a textbook, I promise, just into what your worried parent brain is trying to do. When we are worried about our kids, our brains are starting to collect evidence. That is protective. Your brain wants to know, is my kid okay? Is this a phase? Is this anxiety, ADHD, a learning difference? Is it school stress? Is it sleep? Is this sensory overload? Is this something I should have caught earlier? So your brain starts grabbing everything: the full lunchbox, the Sunday night stomach ache, the missing assignment, the meltdown after school, the math tears, the test panic, the bedtime comment that says, nobody likes me, mom, the teacher email that says, they seem fine in class. And because all of those moments feel connected in your body, you want to hand all of them to someone else at once. You usually need a pattern more than a pile. Research on self-regulation and co-regulation gives us a helpful frame here. Regulation is not a fixed trait that shows up the same way in every setting. Regulation changes depending on the demand, the stress level, the relationship, and the support available. So a kid may look regulated in one setting and struggle in another, especially when the task gets harder or the demand increases. This is why patterns matter. One meltdown tells us something happened. A repeated after-school crash tells us when the load may be too high. One stomachache, that might be random. A stomachache every Sunday night or before tests tells us to look closer. One missing assignment, friends, that might just be a normal kid moment. Repeated missing assignments in a kid who understands the work may point us toward executive functioning, organization, avoidance, anxiety, or maybe even a support mismatch. So instead of starting with, what box does my kid fit in? We start with, what pattern keeps showing up? That is the move. And once we understand that a worried brain collects everything, the next step is not to shame yourself for the pile. The next step is to sort the pile. I want to be really clear about this. We are not anti-label here. A good evaluation, diagnosis, or eligibility category can open doors. It can help a kid access accommodations, services, therapy, medication, consultations, school supports, a better learning plan, or a different kind of understanding from the adults around them. So this is not labels are bad, but we're also not rushing to label from one checklist, one meltdown, one bad grade, or one rough week. A label does not limit a kid. Confusion does. That's the reframe. When a parent asks me, is this anxiety, ADHD, or something else? The goal is not to pick a box as fast as possible. The goal is to notice what is getting in the way, because anxiety and ADHD can overlap. Learning differences can look like avoidance. Gifted kids can still have executive functioning needs. Sensory overload can look like behavior. Sleep or lack thereof can make everything worse. Stress can make a child look less capable than they really are. And supports can exist on paper without actually matching the need of the child. So again, the question is not which box fits. The better question is what pattern keeps showing up and what kind of support helps. That is where clarity starts. So now let's sort the pile into 3 buckets that come up all the time in real parent emails and what I see in my private practice. Here's what I look for: body clues, skill clues, support mismatch clues. Let's start with the first bucket: body clues. Sometimes school stress shows up in the body before a kid has words for it. Things like headaches, stomach aches, feeling sick before tests, needing to go to the nurse, suddenly feeling exhausted. Maybe there's tears before school, trouble falling asleep on Sunday nights, big feelings after a day that looked fine to everyone else. Now, this doesn't mean every stomach ache is anxiety. Please always use common sense and loop in your pediatrician when physical symptoms are persistent, intense, new, or concerning. But also, don't ignore the pattern. They're not going to say, I'm experiencing anticipatory anxiety, mom or dad. It's related to performance demands and uncertainty at school. Friends, they don't say that. They're going to say something else like, my stomach hurts. They might say, I hate school, or I can't go. Or they may say nothing and just move very, very slowly, like sloth mode is activated. Friends, that's body deed. Now let's talk about the second bucket: skill clues. This is the bridge from last week's episode. Sometimes the kid looks capable, but the system around the task is breaking. They understand the material, but they do not start. They finish the work, but they don't turn it in. They know the routine, but they can't follow it without 10 reminders. They may have a 504 plan or an IEP, but they're not using the accommodations. They are bright, but their grades are slipping because planning, organizing, sustaining effort, and asking for help are all harder than the adults realize. This is where parents often hear from schools and teachers, they're capable. And that may be true, but capable does not always mean independently capable, consistently capable, under stress capable, or capable without the right support. So we ask, where is the task breaking? Is it starting, remembering, organizing, transitioning, sustaining effort, tolerating mistakes, asking for help, follow through? That gives us better data than they just don't care. Now here's the third bucket: support mismatch clues. This one matters so much. Sometimes support exists, but it's not matching the actual problem. For example, a child has a reward chart, but the behavior is anxiety driven. A child may have a 504 plan, but they don't know how to ask for the accommodation. A child has extended time, but the real issue is task initiation. A child is told to use tutoring, but the real barrier is shame, avoidance, or not knowing what question to ask when they go to tutoring. A child is sent to the office repeatedly, but no one has mapped when the behavior happens, what comes before it, or what the child needs to re-enter the classroom successfully. So the question becomes, is the support actually matched to the need? Not just, does the support exist, but is it accessible? Is it being used? Does the child understand it? Does the teacher understand it? Does it address the real break point? Does it help the kid recover, re-engage, and build the missing skill? Friends, that is a very different conversation to have. And that is why we bring the pattern, not the novel. Now that we have the 3 buckets: body clues, skill clues, and support mismatch clues, let's talk about what you actually bring to the next adult. 3 things: what happened, what came before it, what helped. That's it. 3 things, friends. What happened, what came before it, what helped. Now listen, this is not forever. This is not obsessively. It's not some sort of 12-tab spreadsheet and a detective board with that red string pinned everywhere. Friends, I love a good detective mystery book, especially if there's a little romance sprinkled in it. But we're not doing that in real life. That's fiction for a reason. Listen, just enough to help the pattern our kids are showing us come into focus. For example, Over the last 2 weeks, we're noticing stomach aches most often on test days or the night before tests. Or you could say, we're seeing homework refusal most often when writing is involved, especially after long school days. Or we're noticing that 504 plan includes breaks, but our child says they don't know when or how to ask for them. Friends, that is so much more useful than saying to school, everything is a disaster and I don't know what to do. Even though respectfully, sometimes everything does feel like a disaster and we don't know what to do. The pattern gives the next adult something to respond to. A teacher can say, yeah, writing does seem to be the hardest part. A pediatrician can say, let's look more closely at the headaches and stomach aches. A school psychologist can say, we may need to understand whether this is attention, anxiety, learning, or a combination. A therapist can say, let's look at coping and anticipatory worry. The pattern creates a doorway. The novel creates overwhelm. And I say that with love because many of us have written the novel. Now, let me put my school psychologist hat on for a minute and talk about what actually helps a team understand what's going on. Okay, school's like in your back pocket. When you bring a concern to a teacher, a school team, pediatrician, therapist, or evaluator, the most helpful information usually answers a few very basic questions. How often is this happening? How big does it get? How long does it last? Where does it happen? When does it happen? What tends to come before it? What helps the child recover or re-engage? What is getting in the way of? What is it getting in the way of? You don't need to use fancy terms. You don't need to say antecedent, behavior, consequence, unless that is your personal love language like me. You can say, here's what happened. Here's what came before it. Here's what helped. Here's what is getting in the way of. Friends, that's useful data. And this matters because regulation shows up under demand. A child's skills may look different during a calm one-on-one conversation than they do during a timed test, a noisy classroom transition, an independent writing task, or a homework routine after a long school day. Co-regulation research also reminds us that kids build regulation through supportive, attuned scaffolding over time, not just through being told to be more responsible. So when you are tracking patterns, you're not trying to diagnose your kid from your kitchen counter. You're trying to ask better questions. Questions like, is this more likely worry, attention, learning, sensory, sleep, stress, or something else? Is the demand too big? Is the support too vague? Is the accommodation written down but not actually usable? Is my child masking at school and falling apart at home? Is this a skill gap, a stress response, or both? That is the pocket version. Better data helps us ask better questions. Friends, here's the pocket version. Better data helps us ask better questions. And because this is where parents often get stuck, let's translate one of the most frustrating school phrases. I love it when schools say this. We don't see that here. Here's the translation. That may mean the behavior is setting specific. Maybe it's masked at school or showing up differently in the classroom. It does not automatically mean your concern is invalid. A teacher may genuinely not be seeing the meltdown, the homework battle, the stomach ache, the shutdown, or the panic you see at home. That information matters. And your home data matters too. So instead of hearing, we don't see that here, as you're making it up, try translating it as, we need to compare what different adults are seeing in different settings. And you could say this to the school team. That's helpful to know. I'm glad my kid is holding it together during the day. At home, we're seeing a pretty consistent pattern around homework and test days. Could we keep an eye out for smaller signs at school? Maybe it's rushing, shutting down. Maybe they're kind of perfectionistic. Maybe my kid needs reassurance or is just avoiding hard tasks. Or you could say something like this. That makes sense. I know it may not look the same in class. I'd love to compare notes because the after-school crash has become pretty consistent in our house. Here's the key line I want you to remember. Not seen at school does not mean not real. So now let's make this concrete. What does it actually look like when we bring the pattern into real life? Well, let's talk about a kiddo who might have some test anxiety. Let's say your kid studies, they know some of the material, but before the test, they get a headache, or their stomach hurts, or they rush through the test just to get it over with. Or maybe they freeze and then say, I'm just bad at this. Here's the pattern to notice. Does it happen before tests, during timed work, when they might be wrong, when the directions feel unclear? What helps? Is it previewing, reduced time pressure, reassurance from a trusted adult? Is there a plan for what to do when they get stuck? Maybe it's talking with the teacher. Maybe it's a check-in with the pediatrician if the physical symptoms are frequent or intense. Sometimes I see this where the kid is bright, but they get stuck. So this is a kid who might be intellectually capable, maybe even gifted. They have big ideas. They can talk about complicated topics at dinner, but the backpack is chaos. Assignments are missing, transitions are rough, and classroom expectations seem to fall apart. Here's the pattern to notice. Is the issue starting, stopping, shifting, organizing, turning things in, managing time, self-control during unstructured moments? What helps? A visual plan, first step support, check-ins, reduced steps, movement, clearer routines. Now let's talk about the kid who has supports on paper, like a 504 plan or an IEP. Your child technically may have accommodations like extended time, breaks, preferential seating, reduced distractions, check-ins, whatever. But in real life, they're not using them. So here's the pattern to notice. Does your child know how to access the support? Do they feel embarrassed? Does the teacher prompt it? Is the support available before the meltdown or only after the crash? Is the accommodation solving the right problem? What helps? Practice asking for the accommodation. Maybe it's a discrete signal, a teacher check-in, a clearer plan, an accommodation that matches the actual problem. Now let's talk about the behavior kid. These are some of my favorite ones to work with in my practice where they're usually the reaction is can be all kinds of things. And usually it's seeing what's underneath and really getting at the root of the issue. It's really fun in therapy. I love it. Okay. So this is your kid let's say your kid is getting repeated reminders, reward charts. Maybe they have visits to the office or you get those behavior notes home on their agendas. It's as a parent, you can get those behavior notes and you're like, oh, yeah, they were out of their seat and talking. Okay. Well, let me tell you about the meltdown they had yesterday when I asked them to do their homework. It was like wet noodling on the ground. It was amazing. And they were just talking. That's not a big deal. But anyway, let's say maybe the chart works for 2 days and then everything falls apart again. This is the pattern we want to notice with our behavior kids. When does the behavior happen? Is it during math, reading, writing, transitions, independent work, after recess? Maybe it's during unstructured social time. Maybe it's when they're corrected. Maybe they feel embarrassed. And then we want to know what helps. Is it connection before correction? Is it having a break or previewing? Maybe it's reducing the demand. Maybe they need more structure, a repair plan. Maybe they need a different adult response. Okay, this is important, friends. The point with our kids is not to excuse everything. The point is to understand the function, that's the purpose, before we keep throwing strategies at the wall. And once we understand that behavior is information, we can translate what the child might be showing us. Let's reframe what your child's behavior might be saying. Your kid's headache might be saying, I'm worried and my body is telling you before my words can. The missed assignment might be saying, I did the work, but I don't have a reliable turn-in system. The shutdown might be saying, the demand feels too big and I don't know how to start. The rushing might be saying, I want this to be over before I have to feel the discomfort of not knowing. The refusal might be saying, I have learned this task usually ends in shame, conflict, or feeling stupid. The behavior chart not working, it might be saying, this strategy is rewarding the finish line, but no one has taught me how to get to the starting line. The unused accommodation might be saying, I technically have support, but I don't know how to access it without feeling different, embarrassed, or confused. Now, friends, like I said, that doesn't mean the behavior is okay. It means the behavior is information. And once we see it as information, we can stop asking, what is wrong with this kid? And start asking instead, what is getting in the way and what support would help? So let's turn this into words you can actually borrow. Here are a few parenting scripts you can borrow from me. Script number 1, this is for you before sending an email. You can tell yourself, I don't need to prove I'm worried. I need to make the pattern easy to see. Script number 2 that you can use with your kid. I'm not trying to label you or get you in trouble. I'm trying to understand what helps. Script number 3. This is what you can say when your kid feels discouraged. I noticed that this has been feeling really heavy lately. I'm on your team while we figure out what's getting in the way. Script number 4, something you can say to the teacher. Hey, Mrs. Sunshine, I wanted to share a pattern we're noticing at home. We're seeing specific behavior, most often around a time, a task, a demand. What seems to help is whatever support it might be. Are you noticing anything similar at school, even in a smaller way? Here's script number 5 when the school says, we don't see that here. Thanks. That's helpful to know. At home, we're seeing it pretty consistently around a specific time or task. Could we keep an eye out for smaller signs like rushing, shutting down, perfectionism, irritability, or needing more supports after transitions? Here's script number 6 when you want to talk to a pediatrician, a therapist, or school psychologist like me. You might say this. We are trying to understand whether this looks more like anxiety, attention, learning concerns, or something else. We've noticed the pattern most often when demand goes up, and what helps is this specific support. What would you recommend as the next step? Okay, friends, so what do we do with all of this without turning you into a full-time case manager by Thursday? Tiny wins. You don't need to solve the whole thing this week. You don't need to email every provider, request every evaluation, and become a full-time case manager by Thursday. We're doing tiny wins. Remember, pick one is enough. Tiny win number 1, pick one pattern to notice. Choose one concern to watch this week, just one. Maybe it's the after-school crash, homework avoidance, physical symptoms, physical complaints, test anxiety, missing assignments, shutdown, emotional outbursts, not using supports when they are not using supports that already exist. Look for where does it show up? What seems to trigger it? What does it look like? What helps? One useful clue a day is enough. Tiny win number 2, add one micro connection. Say one sentence to your kid that protects the relationship while you're noticing. You could try something like, I'm not trying to label you or get you in trouble. I'm trying to understand what helps. Or you could say, I noticed homework has felt really heavy lately. I'm on your team while we figure out what's getting in the way. Tiny win number 3, add one micro boundary. Don't send the midnight novel email. Write it if your brain needs to dump it. Save it, sleep on it, come back in the morning and turn it into 3 clear bullets. Script to yourself. Remember, I don't need to prove this is hard by sending everything tonight. I can bring the pattern tomorrow. Tiny win number 4, write the 3-bullet email. Before emailing the teacher, write these 3 bullets. 1, what I'm noticing. 2, when it tends to happen. 3, what I'm wondering. That might sound like, hi, teacher. I wanted to share the pattern we're noticing at home. We're seeing blank behavior, most often around this time, task, or demand. What seems to help is blank support. Are you noticing anything similar at school, even in a smaller way? That's it. Not the whole novel, the pattern. Tiny win number 5, choose one next conversation. Pick the person closest to the concern. If it's schoolwork, classroom behavior, or learning is the biggest issue, start with the teacher or the school team. If headaches, stomach aches, sleep, appetite, or physical symptoms are big, start with your kid's pediatrician. If the patterns are unclear, complex, or connected to learning, attention, anxiety, and behavior, consider a school psychologist or someone like me in private practice. If coping, emotions, anxiety, or family stress are the main concern, a therapist may be the right next conversation. Here's a tiny script you can use. Can you help me understand whether this looks more like anxiety, attention, learning stress, or something else we should explore? Friends, remember, pick one is enough. All right, before we end this episode, a few tiny favors to ask. First, friends, leave a review for the podcast. It helps other parents find the show when they are sitting in the pickup line, Googling things like, why does my child fall apart after school? Or how do I email the teacher without sounding dramatic? Next, share this episode with a friend who has a teacher email sitting in the Notes app that starts with, sorry, this is so long. You know the friend I'm talking about. Share the episode. Third, grab my free resource called Is This Anxiety, ADHD, or Something Else? This guide is linked in the show notes. It's a practical guide for noticing patterns, asking better questions, and taking the next helpful step without rushing to label your kid. Finally, consider following me on Instagram at Psych2Parent. We're building our community of parents, school-age kids who are doing the best they can, one tiny win at a time. So if you're sitting with the long email, the full lunchbox, the stomachache before tests, the missing assignments, that unused student support plan or 504 plan, and the child who looks, quote, fine in one setting but comes home carrying a lot, I want you to remember this. You are not overreacting by paying attention. You don't have to solve it all today. Start by noticing the pattern. What happens? What comes before it? What helps? And where the support may not be matching your kid's need. This does not mean every hard moment needs a diagnosis. And it also does not mean labels are bad. A good evaluation or diagnosis can open doors. But before we rush to a box, we look for the pattern. We bring 3 clear bullets instead of the midnight novel. We ask better questions, and we make the invisible a little easier to see. And the next time you sit at that tiny round table in that tiny chair, remember, schools have expertise, and you are the expert on your child. Your insight is not extra, it's essential. You're not behind, you're building a partnership, and you're building skills, yours and theirs. One small, doable step at a time. Until next time, my friends. Thank you for hanging out with me on Psych2Parent. I'm Dr. Amy, your not-so-typical school psychologist, and I'm genuinely glad you're here doing this work instead of quietly white-knuckling it and blaming yourself. Your tiny win from today's episode is simple. Do not overhaul your entire parenting style. Pick one idea, one sentence, or one tiny shift and try it in a low-stakes moment this week. Then notice what changes, even if it is just by 1%. If you want more support, head over to psych2parent.com. You'll find show notes, simple scripts, and parent-friendly guides that go with these episodes. While you're there, make sure you join the Tiny Wins mailing list so you get weekly brain-based tips, real-life examples from my work with families, and first dibs on new workshops and resources. It's the easiest way for us to stay connected beyond the podcast. If this podcast was helpful, it really does matter when you tap follow or subscribe. Leave a quick review or text it to a friend who is parenting a big-feeling, big-hearted kid too. This podcast is for education and encouragement. It is not therapy, and it's not a substitute for individualized care. If you're worried about your child or yourself, please reach out to a trusted professional in your area. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are building something new, one tiny win at a time. I'll see you in the next episode, probably with a cold coffee in hand, cheering you on.